good morning, everyone, from the land known as Central Texas, which has finally starting to feel like fall. It's actually 54 degrees this morning, which is crazy. All right, so we are back with our next reading of the Old Testament. If you've been following along, you know that we're in the book of Leviticus. And I got to double check because I don't want to say it wrong, but I think we're in chapter 12 today. Nope, chapter 13 today. So Leviticus chapter 13. This is going to be a longer read, so brace yourself for it. We'll go ahead and get started pretty quickly. Remember, if you don't have a Bible, you can go to Bible.com and read for free. You can also download the YouVersion app on any Android or iOS device. All right, topics we're going to cover. The law concerning leprosy, and the law concerning leprous garments for 59 verses. Obviously, this was a very serious issue for them, and it does carry into chapter 14 as well, which is another really long chapter as well. So, all right, so I've got to go to work soon, so let's go ahead and get started. Not to rush the word, but we do got to get this in before I go to work. All right, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when a man has on the skin of his body a swelling, a scab, or a bright spot, and it becomes on the skin of his body like a leprous sore, then he shall be brought to Aaron the priest, or to one of his sons, the priests. The priest shall examine the sore on the skin of the body, and if the hair on the sore has turned white, and the sore appears to be deeper than the skin of his body, it is a leprous sore. Then the priest shall examine him and pronounce him unclean. But if the bright spot is white on the skin of his body and does not appear to be deeper than the skin, and its hair has not turned white, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the sore 7 days. And the priest shall examine him on the seventh day, and indeed if the sore appears to be as it was, and the sore has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall isolate him another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine him again on the seventh day, and indeed if the sore has faded and the sore has not spread on the skin, then the priest shall proclaim him clean. It is only a scab, and he shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scab should spread at all over his skin, after he has been seen by the priest for his cleansing, he shall be seen by the priest again. And if the priest sees that the scab has indeed spread on the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is leprosy. When a leprous sore is on a person, then he shall be brought to the priest, and the priest shall examine him. And indeed, if the swelling on the skin is white, and it has turned the hair white, and there is a spot of raw flesh in the swelling, it is an old leprosy on the body, on the skin of his body. The priest shall pronounce him unclean, and shall not isolate him, for he is unclean. And if leprosy breaks out all over the skin, and leprosy covers all the skin of the one who has a sore from head to foot, wherever the priest looks, then the priest shall consider, and indeed if the leprosy has covered all his body, he shall pronounce him clean who has the sore. It is all turned white, he is clean. But when raw flesh appears on him, then he shall be unclean. And the priest shall examine the raw flesh and pronounce him to be unclean, for the raw flesh is unclean, it is leprosy. Or if the raw flesh changes and turns white again, he shall come to the priest, and the priest shall examine him, and indeed if the sore has turned white, then the priest shall pronounce him clean who has a sore, he is clean. Still doesn't sound clean. And if the body develops a boil on the skin and is healed, and in the place of the boil there comes a white swelling, or a bright spot, reddish white, and there it shall be shown to the priest. And if the priest sees it, it indeed appears deeper than the skin, and the hair is turned white, the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore which has broken out of the boil. But if the priest examine it, and indeed there are no white hairs in it, and it is not deeper than the skin, but has faded, the priest shall isolate him 7 days, and if it should at all spread over his skin, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore. But if the bright spot stays in one place and has not spread, it is a scar of the boil, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. Or if the body receives a burn on its skin by fire, and the raw flesh of the burn becomes a bright spot, reddish white or white, then the priest shall examine it, and indeed if the hair of the bright spot has turned white, and it appears deeper than the skin, it is leprosy broken out in the burn. Therefore the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore. But if the priest examines it, and indeed there are no white hairs in the bright spot, and is not deeper than the skin, but has faded, then the priest shall isolate him 7 days, and if the priest shall examine him on the 7th day. If it has spread all over his body, then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a leprous sore. But if the bright spot stays in one place and has not spread on the skin, but has faded, it is a swelling from the burn. The priest shall pronounce him clean, for it is a scar from the burn. If a man or a woman has a sore on the head or the beard, then the priest shall examine the sore, and indeed, if it appears deeper than the skin, there is in it a thin yellow hair. What in the world? Then the priest shall pronounce him unclean. It is a scaly leprosy of the head or beard. But if the priest examines the scaly sore, and indeed it does not appear deeper than the skin, there is no black hair in it, then the priest shall isolate the one who has the scale 7 days. And on the 7th day the priest shall examine the sore, and indeed the scale is not spread, and there is no yellow hair in it, and the scale does not appear deeper than the skin, he shall shave himself, but the scale he shall not shave. I hope not. And the priest shall isolate the one who has the scale another 7 days. On the 7th day the priest shall examine the scale, and indeed, if the scale is not spread over the skin and does not appear deeper than the skin, then the priest shall pronounce him clean. He shall wash his clothes and be clean. But if the scale should spread all over the body, all over the skin after his cleansing, then the priest shall examine him, and indeed, if the scale has spread over the skin, the priest need not seek for a yellow hair, he is unclean. But if the scale appears to be at a standstill, and there is a black hair grown up in it, the scale has healed. He is clean, and the priest shall pronounce him clean. I'm no doctor or physician, but I have no idea what these colors of hair has to do with anything. This is gross. If a man or woman has bright spots on the skin of the body, specifically white bright spots, then the priest shall look, and indeed, if the bright spots on the skin of the body are dull white, it is a white spot that grows on the skin, he is clean. And for the man whose hair has fallen from his head, like me, he is bald, but he is clean. Oh, thank God for that. He whose hair has fallen from his forehead, he is bald on the forehead, but he is clean. And if there is on the bald head or bald forehead a reddish-white sore, it is leprosy breaking out on his bald head or his bald forehead. Then the priest shall examine it, and indeed, if the swelling of the sore is reddish-white, or on his bald head or on the bald forehead, as the appearance of leprosy on the skin of the body, he is a leprous man, he is unclean. The priest shall surely pronounce him unclean. His sore is on his head. Now the leper on whom the sore is, his clothes shall be torn, and his head bare, and he shall cover his mustache and cry, unclean, unclean. He shall be unclean. All the days he has a sore, he shall be unclean. He is unclean, and he shall dwell alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. This must be their version of COVID. All right. The law concerning leprous garments. Also, if the garment has a leprous plague in it, whether it is a woolen garment or a linen garment, whether it is in the warp or woof of linen or wool, whether in leather or in anything made of leather, and if the plague is greenish or reddish in the garment or in the leather, whether in the warp or in the woof, or in anything made of leather, it is a leprous plague, and shall be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine the plague, and isolate that which has the plague 7 days. And he shall examine the plague on the 7th day, and if the plague has spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, in the leather or in anything made of leather, the plague is an active leprosy. It is unclean. He shall therefore burn that garment in which is the plague, whether warp or woof, in wool or in linen, or anything of leather, for it is an active leprosy. The garment shall be burned in the fire. But if the priest examines it, and indeed the plague has not spread in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof or in anything made of leather, then the priest shall command that they wash the thing in which is the plague, and he shall isolate it another 7 days. Then the priest shall examine the plague after it has been washed, and indeed if the plague has not changed its color, though the plague has not spread, it is unclean, and you shall burn it in the fire. it continues eating away whether the damage is outside or inside. If the priest examines it, and indeed the plague has faded after washing it, then he shall tear it out of the garment, whether out of the warp or out of the woof, out of the leather. But if it appears again in the garment, either in the warp or in the woof, or in anything made of leather, it is a spreading plague. You shall burn it with fire, that which is in the plague. And if you wash the garment, either warp or woof, or whatever is made of leather, if the plague has disappeared from it, then it shall be washed a second time, and shall be clean. This is the law of the leprous plague in garment of wool or linen, either in warp or woof, or in anything made of leather, to pronounce it clean or to pronounce it unclean. All right, that concludes our reading of chapter 13 of the book of Leviticus. Do you know one reason why I believe that the King James Version, or the New King James that we're reading out of today, do you know why I believe it to be the one that we should be reading, and the truest versions of the Bible? Do you know why I believe that? Because they don't take stuff out. I'm telling you right now, if I were writing this, right, I would have removed so much from this passage. Because how many times, I don't even know, we're not going to count it, but how many times did I read the words, either warp or woof, or whatever is made of leather, right? I read that over and over and over again, because it's trying to make a point, and there's a reason why you don't take it out. Would I have taken it out? Probably, because I hate reading the same thing over and over and over again, but there's a reason for it. Anytime that something is repeated in the Bible, it is to make a point. It is to drive home a point, because we humans tend to not listen very well, and we forget what we're hearing anyways. All right, so, wow. That concludes chapter 13 of the book of Leviticus. We are over 12 minutes today. I know most of you probably haven't even gotten to this point of the reading, the conversation. You probably made it to like 3 minutes and quit. Shame on you. All right. Thank you all so much for your likes, your follows. I appreciate your comments. If you guys have any questions, I will do everything possible to try and answer them. So, all right. Hope you guys have a blessed day. Enjoy it. It's Tuesday. I woke up thinking it was Wednesday for some reason. I guess I wanted the week to be over already. All right. Thank you all so much. So y'all have a blessed day. God bless.
When life keeps falling and wonder where he is in all this mess, he's right there to guide you. Unseen, you're not